Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. 5, 4, 3, 2, kaboom! And kabust. Thatcher's slow-motion housing time bomb ticks away under the British economy over which George Osborne presides. He says 2014 will be a year of hard truths, the hardest of all being that many must lose so that the few marginal seat voters he needs may win at the property roulette wheel. So the hard truth for 2014 is that in the kaboom and kabust property market, never must supply meet demand, for there be far market pricing, y'all. So hurry, panic, buy now. Forget the job. There ain't no jobs. Get a loan, because if you don't, get in the government-backed kaboom scheme, you'll face a year of Osborne's hard kabust austerity truths. Oh, Stacy.
Yes, Max. Cory Doctorow of Boing Boing says this: Thatcher's slow-motion housing time bomb. Housing in the UK is a microcosm for everything wrong with neoliberalism. Corruption, cronyism, grinding human misery, and funny accounting to prove that it's all working, honestly. So he's talking about, and everybody in town has been talking about, James Meek's piece in the London Review of Books called Where Will We Live? Because right now at the moment there are about 250,000 households being formed per year in the United Kingdom, and yet only about 100,000 private properties being built. That's included from the private sector. Prices are soaring, and yet for some reason no private contractors want to come in and build homes.
Well, it's the economics of extinction. So they're not building homes for British people. And as they become extinct through austerity measures that starves them to death, the remaining housing stock goes up in value. Just like the Japanese fishermen who fish big bluefin tuna to extinction. The tuna in the refrigerator is worth more because there's less of them. So they're applying this mentality of let's commit economic genocide in Britain to force the remaining houses up in value, and then we can use those as collateral to get more loans, to go down to Monte Carlo and blow our asset extraction gains and various gambling schemes.
Well, they in particular speak to one woman named Pat Quinn, who is on disability. She worked for 40 years or 30 years, and she's lived in a property for 40 years. And the government is now introducing a bedroom tax, so she's unable to afford it. She has to move out. She has to go into a one-bedroom. That's all they'll pay for. But there are no one-bedrooms in her area. There's something like 10,000 people looking for a one-bedroom on a list for a one-bedroom, 10,000, and yet only 890 become available in this area in any year. So as you see, a very extreme shortage. She says, I'm sure if they had their way, they would kill us. I really believe that. There's this shortage of housing. So the article by James Meek looks back and says, where did this all begin? To understand how it came to this, you have to go back to 1979 when Margaret Thatcher began forcing local authorities to sell council houses to any sitting tenant able and eager to buy, of discounts of up to 50%. But with the money they earned, councils were not allowed to build new housing. They received £40 billion over the next 25 years. That was at the half-price discount. It was housing stock built by the taxpayer, given to a few select few who were able to profit the extra 50% and either move to Spain, where they've now lost all that money in a housing crash. But this is the case. Getting
back to Pat Quinn's comments, she's not paranoid. The government does want to kill her because just like in previous genocides, whether it's the American Indians or others, famous examples of genocide, it's not paranoia. The government does want to kill her because she's a drain on the system, and if she's gone, then they can, flip her house or give it to cronies. And she's not wanted in this country, Pat Quinn. I mean, you should maybe move to Bulgaria or something. You're not wanted here. Osborne and Cameron, they don't want you. Not only they don't want you living here, and you're quite right. They would prefer if you're dead.
Well, I think they would prefer her here just because they're people they want to buy votes for need a lot of people desperate for housing and not enough being built. And here's a chart to show from James Meek. This is the housing market, housing build, the new build from 1947 to present. The light gray area is the private market. The dark gray is the housing association. The black area is local authorities. As you see, right after World War II, there was a huge booming in building. And then today, present, there's a total, utter collapse in any building.
Right. Well, the Thatcher and Reagan period of economics in this country, in the United States, brought in this era of debt, which is an economy based on debt. Now, the debt in the UK has never been higher in 100 years. And as these housing bubbles boom and bust, people are thrown out of their homes, whether it's here in the UK or thrown out of their bedrooms via the bedroom tax, or in the US, they were summarily thrown out of their homes, and now their homes are owned by Wall Street, who have become slumlords. So that was the plan. That's by using debt as a way to bankrupt society and enrich a few of the debt peddlers. And the debt in the UK, if you all-inclusive now, is approaching 1,000% debt to GDP. So it's never, ever been in so much debt, because this housing boom will be a bust, and then they'll have to move another 200 or 300 billion pounds of debt onto the national balance sheet, and the country is at risk of going completely bankrupt, as it did in the 1970s. So we're going to go the 1970s, when Britain had to be bailed out by the IMF. Then you had Thatcher, who decided to bring about an enormous housing debt-enabled fake boom, and then it's going to go right back into the garbage.
Again, back to that chart, you saw that the house prices rise stratospherically as it collapses in the house building. So those are tied together. But all of that so-called wealth given to the private sector, they didn't do anything with it. They didn't stir innovation, entrepreneurship, the economy. No new jobs were created. They basically spent it on booze and new clothes and trips to, the Canary Islands. It didn't seem to go back into the economy. So going back to this story, they have to still, the poor people didn't disappear, because all of that wealth given to a few select few who were able to buy these properties at 50% discounts, they didn't create new jobs. They didn't do anything to stir the economy. So they still had to, the government still had to pay, housing benefits. So right to buy thus created an astonishing leak of state money, taxpayers' money, if you like to think of it that way, into the hands of a rentier class. First, the government sold people homes it owned at a huge discount. Then it allowed the original buyers to keep the profit when they sold those homes to a private landlord at market price. Then the government artificially raised market rents by choking off supply, by making it impossible for councils to replace the sold-off houses. Then it paid those artificially high rents to the same private landlords in the form of housing benefit, many times higher than the housing benefit it would have paid had the houses remained in council hands.
Again, these are not economic policies that are failing. This is a genocidal policy that's succeeding. Let's return to the comments of Pat Quinn. She said, she's a British citizen, "I feel like the government wants me dead." You are correct. The government would prefer if you just topped yourself. That's the great innovation of the coalition government. Yeah.
Well, actually, the coalition government, there is a huge rift emerging this week regarding this. House price rises must stop. So house prices are up 8% across the entire United Kingdom in 2013. Well, Vince Cable is not happy with this, and he's come out really hard against David Cameron and George Osborne, who he charges with trying to buy votes for the next election. Osborne and Cameron are out this week with the new policies saying they want to push more taxpayer funds into not increasing supply. In fact, they've cut by 2/3 the funds to housing associations to build new homes. So they're trying to decrease supply, but drive the price up.
Right. Well, Vince Cable, is another UK politician, along with Osborne or David Cameron, who doesn't seem to understand that the reason house prices are going up is the unfettered, out-of-control money printing by Mark Carney at the Bank of England as an attempt to continue to bail out the big four zombie banks in the UK, RBS, Lloyds, Barclays, and the other one. So they don't understand. Vince Cable doesn't seem to understand that there's a connection. So either he's just financially illiterate, or he's trying to convince the UK people that he's stupid, which I think he's doing a good job.
The Economist did a piece about these house prices, because it's important to note that the house prices are rising very fast here. It's only in nominal terms. Here's The Economist. It's a chart in nominal prices. The light blue is UK. As you see, prices are rocketing. That dark blue line is the US, not so rocketing. And the orange is Japan, definitely not rocketing. But if you put it in, here's the chart in real terms, you see prices are indeed down 22% in the UK, but people are very just as happy with nominal price rises. They don't understand that they're actually getting poorer and poorer.
Well, no, this is what I'm saying. In other words, if you were to mark to market and do real accounting, in other words, if KPMG or PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte Touche or Ernst & Young, who work for the government, if they actually handed them a piece of paper with honest accounting, not Arthur Andersen Enron accounting, in which they're all still guilty of perpetuating, but they did a real accounting, what the housing stock is really worth on the balance sheet of these four banks, then the government would have to close these four banks because those four banks, the big four banks in the UK, are technically insolvent. They are only still breathing by an accounting trick called mark to fantasy or mark to model, that these bonds, these mortgage bonds and these house prices are somehow at these inflated prices because of the continued money printing by the central bank. And they say you'd never look at the actual price on any given moment. Just look at the flow. Just look at the flow. It's a hologram perpetuated by money flow, and that's how we do our accounting. And here, give us a big fat check. So we give you this, essentially cook the books, because we're also in on the fraud. The big four accounting firms and the big four banks and the big four most corrupt politicians in the UK. That would be Cameron, Vincent Cable, Osborne, and the Lib Dem guy who nobody knows his name because he's a non-event.
He's Nick Clegg. But I want to point out that there's a new housing, luxury apartments right behind us, right behind the mayor's office. It's not even being...
Where? Let's take a look at it. Look at this. Oh, my God. Look, there it is right there, Stacy. Tell me about it. Tell me more about it.
Those are being advertised solely to Hong Kong. Now, going back to that Economist chart, I'm going to show you quick real prices in Hong Kong. You see those are rocketing. And if you see that gap between London and Hong Kong, you see that, in fact, this is why they're buying up all of the property here, because property here is actually getting very much cheaper if they leverage their own property out of Hong Kong as a global Ponzi scheme.
You know, KPMG says my tie is worth 10,000 pounds, Stacey. But I'll give it to you for 5,000 pounds as a deal. What do you think?
I'll take it.
And I'll have to give them a 1,000-pound kickback to do the fraudulent bookkeeping. Thanks, big accounting firms. All right, we got to go, Stacey.
I'm going to go take out a Help to Buy loan.
Stay tuned for the second half of Lola. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Liam Halligan of the Telegraph. Happy New Year.
Snovim Gordon.
Austerity. We were talking about it all week. Tell us more.
Well, I think up until now, it's fair to say that even though there has been, in some departments, pretty severe cuts in public expenditure in the UK, the overall envelope has been one of actually increasing spending, ever more borrowing. That's why from about 2008 up to 2016, the national debt of this country is expanding from about 750 billion to about 1,600 billion pounds on the government's own numbers.
Right, so the debt's going up. So there hasn't really been any austerity at all.
There has been some austerity if you happen to have been in the firing line in certain departments or recipients of certain benefits. So we shouldn't disregard the fact that there is obviously human misery out there, but the overall envelope, of course, has been one of ever-rising spending and ever more debts.
But isn't austerity a euphemism for something more like ethnic cleansing? I mean, seriously, it's not ethnic. It is cleansing, though. In other words, they have a whole population in this country that they want to get rid of. I mean, a woman recently said, I feel like the government's targeting me and they want me dead. I mean, why is that an incorrect statement? They're just cutting off services from people who are now dying.
Look, a lot of people who are on low incomes or in need of our public services, and hey, everybody in this country needs our public services at some stage, will feel where the rubber hits the road that they have been maligned and their rights have been transgressed. That's just the reality of a country with a population of almost 60 million people where the government is almost half of GDP. There will inevitably be people who suffer at the margin. But as an economist, as a dismal scientist, Max, the big picture is that government borrowing has been going up ever more, national debt is spiralling, our political classes here in the UK have been very careful to deliberately obfuscate the deficit on the one hand, which is of course coming down, the annual increase in government debt, and the overall size of what we must service year in, year out.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying they can call it austerity, but the debt keeps going up. So don't call it austerity. Call it some kind of economic cleansing, because they're not austerely reducing.
It seems to me that the lunacy of the current political debate in the UK at the moment is that the coalition and the Tories in particular are talking tough about austerity and kind of taking the political hit of having to become grown up and adult about our public finances without actually implementing the austerity that should have the macroeconomic benefits. Now, what the Chancellor is now trying to do, New Year, the credit card bills from Christmas are hitting the doormats, people are starting to feel they have to take stock of their own personal finances. The government's trying to reflect that by saying, you know what, people? We are still using half of the £100 billion that we're borrowing year in, year out. Massive numbers, despite austerity. We're using half of that to pay interest on the debt. And of course, this is at a level when interest rates on gilts are still rigged because the government is the biggest owner of gilts in the market via QE. Now that serious people are starting to face reality that interest rates are going to rise sooner rather than later, the Chancellor is having to get to grips with the fact that mainstream commentators are going to start realising, wow, we're spending half the money that we borrow on interest, and that's going to go up as interest rates go up. We're now spending as much on interest, even at low rates, as we do on educating our children in the state sector. Soon it's going to be even more. And so the Chancellor is trying to get ahead of that sense of outrage by saying, yes, we do need to start taking austerity more seriously. It's also, Max, about positioning within the Tory party. Theresa May, the Home Secretary at the moment, has made tremendous gains in terms of polling as who is going to be the leader in waiting to Cameron by pressing a harder right agenda, more of a immigration concern agenda. And Osborne wants a bit of that action. He feels there is political mileage for him personally, and maybe even for his party, in stressing that, yes, the UK is still a spendaholic government. We are still running our public finances in a way that is completely unsustainable.
Let me get back to my thought here in terms of this being a version of cleansing, because you're targeting a group of people in this economy who are not willing to go out and allow themselves to become shameless city speculators. So you have a population of city speculators who are morally dubious at best, who are caught time in again and again committing acts of fraud, and yet the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are constantly writing them checks. There is no austerity for financial fraud in the City of London. There is no austerity for real estate speculation in the City of London. There is no austerity for the least morally centered in this country. That's where the cleansing cleaver comes down. If you're corrupt, if you're a kleptocrat, if you kowtow to foreign dictators, you get a check. If you're an outstanding citizen just trying to do your bit, you get hit with austerity. Why the two-speed economy here? What does Cameron and Osborne have against basic working British people? Or do they have some kind of built-in Tory, Eton kind of Oxbridge loathing of the average British person?
Steady, I went to Oxford, be careful.
Well, talk to me about it. You went to Oxford.
Yeah.
You mixed with these people. Do they just hate? Are they misanthropes? Do they hate humanity?
Max, there's a lot in what you just said that I completely agree with. You know, growing up in the UK, all the talk was in the 70s of excessive subsidies to industry being distorting, to British Leyland. Remember, we used to actually own the companies that made the cars in this country, the mass-produced cars. Industry subsidies to mining and so on. And the intelligentsia would rail against these subsidies as being completely out of control and unjustified. And yet, of course, the subsidies to our financial services sector is outrageous, egregious, kleptocratic. I completely agree with you. I've been saying that in my Sunday Telegraph column till I'm blue in the face, literally for more than 5 years now. It strikes me that our political classes, both in this country and in the States, are far too close to the financial services industry. They're almost beguiled by the money men and their sense of genius. Of course, it's not just about campaign donations. It's also about this sense that the city is untouchable in this country because it does create an awful lot of revenue.
Okay, stop right there. No, let me cut it. Let me stop. No, it's my show, damn it. Isn't the way to stop the madness right now and restore a balance is to raise interest rates right now. Get rid of the predators in the city who are milking their zombie banks with low rates, and get rid of these horrible speculators. Give people who save and work real wages and real savings. Stop the interest rate apartheid. Raise rates today. Go back to the normalized rates of interest in this country are 5, 6, 7%, not 1%. Why not do that right now to show the world, Cameron and Osborne, that you're not an interest rate apartheid, genocidal, economic Holocaust provoker? Why not?
I think it's right. I think we do need to raise interest rates in this country. I've suffered brickbats for a long time by making these arguments.
What's a brickbat?
A slap around the face with a wet herring, Max.
Oh, you mean like a load of old codswallop? Blimey!
It strikes me that QE1 back in... I've just written about this. Again, QE1 back in 2009 maybe just about justified some of it in order to create some room for manoeuvre so insolvent banks could be wound down, protecting the depositors, and we could have creative destruction and move on. QE2, completely grotesque. QE3, it seems to me, completely off the planet in terms of was it justified given the damage it does to people buying annuities, given the massive inequalities that it provokes, given the implications for commodity prices, soft commodities, food prices, and so on. You know,
so to put this in the context, QE is
been...
the opposite of higher rates. In other words, higher rates are on one side of the spectrum. QE is the opposite, right?
No, I think they're very much part of the same...
But giving QE is to keep interest rates artificially low.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the opposite.
No, of course.
And that's your point, as I understand it. You're
Absolutely,
saying QE1, you gave them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
You said, OK, it was a crisis.
Yeah, we would have had social and deep political unrest had the banks just fallen over. We had to have some kind of emergency measure. But it should have been used as a crash pad in order to restructure our banking sector and bring in real reforms, a real separation of investment and commercial banking. Instead, it became a comfort blanket, it became a lifestyle choice. Now QE has friends in very high places. It, of course, allows a lot of banks just over there to pretend that they're solvent when they're not.
OK, but you're saying in QE1, it would have prevented the banks having gone through a forced restructuring at economic duress of the entire country. Here we are 5 years later, and that economic duress is being pushed onto those, the victims, in the form of austerity. So all they do is defer the chaos for 5 years and take it out of the Tory, majority schmucks who ruined this country, and they foist it on, the Northerners, the good working people of Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester, and those are the only 3 cities I know in the north of this country. And those people are now suffering as deferred suffering, and they give bankers deferred compensation, and deferred liability, and deferred prosecution, and they give everyone else deferred austerity. I do regret not being harder at the time when the QE1 was rolled out. Or what's your position now? Because we only have about a minute left, and I realize I have taken you on a journey, a vast journey.
A magical mystery tour.
A magical tour. So bring this back to...
And now I've got 30 seconds.
No, wait a minute.
Max, just for the record, I completely disagree with QE2, QE3. I think it's fair to say, of all the newspaper columnists in this country, I'm probably the most vociferous opponent of QE, noted for it. I do think interest rates need to rise, even though it's going to be tough. We need a Paul Volcker. We need proper reforms to separate investment and commercial banking. I'm actually amazed that there's not more outrage in the UK about the direction that policy has taken in recent years. I think your outrage is well justified, if slightly stage managed at times, if I may say so. But what you're doing, you are bringing these very difficult issues to the forefront of our public debate and shoving them in people's faces. In my way, I've been trying to do the same thing as well, despite the university I went to.
I have unfiltered rage that I share with my audience, and they appreciate that because they stop coughing over my lines, and they appreciate that. But Liam Halligan, let's talk about the future, because clearly, judging by your recent Telegraph column, you have fallen head over heels in love with Bitcoin. And I can understand why.
Oh, it was a few months ago now.
But since we were on the show last, discussed this last time, you've got a big gaming company in the U.S., Zynga, which has adopted Bitcoin. You've got now BitPay, which is the number one name in merchant processing, and Bitcoin is now...
Massive transaction volumes, too.
Massive transaction
Bigger than PayPal now, almost?
Could be, it's bigger
Western
than PayPal.
Union and its sites?
Right, so this is going to have a disruptive effect on the economy. So do you think that trend is going to continue? And over there in the pages of the Telegraph, are readers starting to cotton on to the fact that this is a transformative new economic development that could, at the end of the day, put the Bank of England out of business? I want to focus on this question. Could BitPay, because it's a distributed trust system, the central bank of BitPay is the distributed network. There is no Mark Carney.
Sure.
Will we see
the viewers understand? Yeah. Okay. It strikes me that whenever something is denigrated,
we have about 10 seconds.
By the mainstream, it's because there's something really interesting there. The cardinal truth about Bitcoin is that only 21 million will ever be created.
I got to stop you right there. We got to have you on back soon because Stacy, the producer, is about ready to cut my head off. We got to go. Liam Halligan, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
You're welcome.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Liam Halligan from the Telegraph. If you'd like to get in touch, please tweet us at Keiser Report. Bye.